Hey now, my name is Nick, and today we're taking a look at Myth, the board game from Mercs Miniatures. And this is actually just the top of the box because I still have all of the stuff out on the table. I was trying to squeeze in as many solo plays as I could before I actually got down to my review. And we'll get back to that in a minute. Now, the company responsible for this, Mercs Miniatures, has one other game under their belt called Mercs. Actually, it's a miniatures tactical skirmish game. They actually have a cooperative version of this called Mercs Recon on Kickstarter right now. I'm not trying to plug them or anything, I just thought it was worth mentioning. Now, Myth is both famous and infamous at this point. It's famous because when it was actually up on Kickstarter for its funding, it made almost $1 million, which even by today's board game Kickstarter standards is a big deal. And it had a lot of hype behind it because of the theme, the art style, the miniatures. People just loved the concept of it, that it was a cooperative dungeon crawl, that was card driven and just had this great art style. There was a lot of really unique things that happened during the campaign, all the different factions that were unlocked. They decided to do gender swapped characters based purely off of backer feedback, which was a very cool thing. There was just a lot of hype and hotness behind this game. Now, that hype and hotness has continued up until this day, almost a year later, when they actually released the game, but not quite in a good way. What's basically happening now is that a lot of people are unhappy with the rules as presented by Mercs Miniatures. Backers have gotten their copies of the games, early reviews have come in from review copies they've sent out, and people are just unhappy with the clunky rules. I'm saying clunky in quotations, that's what a lot of people think. And just the response that Mercs has given to that. Now, Mercs, for their part, has released a lot of facts, frequently asked question documents, and different walkthroughs, and are on the cusp of releasing some videos as well to try to help people out as much as possible. But nevertheless, there has been a lot of controversy surrounding the game. And I'm going to say this before we go to my overview and before we go to my final thoughts. My 2 cents on this in the beginning is that I actually had this game in my hands as a backer almost a month ago. I mean, at least 3 weeks ago, I think. And normally, when I get a very hot Kickstarter game, especially one as hot as this one, I will do my best to do an unboxing video, play it as much as I can, at least, 2 to 4 times, depending on what type of game it is, and then try to get up a review as quickly as possible. That's the life of a reviewer. You're constantly trying to feed that beast, that reviewing beast, and get hot videos up to get as many views as possible. But in the case of Myth, I had to take my time with this one, and I vacillated a lot back and forth as far as how much time I wanted to invest into trying to understand the game as best I could, because I was having problems with the rules as well. I wanted to give the game its fair shake. I had 2, I don't usually talk about how many exact plays of this I got in, but I got 2 full playthroughs of different chapters with my game group. After that, no one really wanted to play it much, so I had to do solo plays on my own whenever I could squeeze them in, which is why I mentioned that I was doing solo plays all the way up until the time I started filming this review. And, I can honestly say that I'm still not entirely sure what my thoughts are about this game with 100% certainty. This is going to be one of my most ambivalent reviews, but just something that I hate. I like to be very definitive in how I feel about a game and give my review in that regard. But nevertheless, I feel I don't want to wait around anymore for Mercs Miniatures to put out more and more frequently asked questions docs and clarify their rules decisions even more. I feel that this is the game that was presented to me. This is the game that I paid for. This is the game that I want to review. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Let's go ahead and do a very brief overview of the game, because there's a lot to do to this game. And like I said, even I'm not sure of all the rules yet. I don't think a lot of people are. So I'm going to give you a very broad overview of what this game is about, what it does, all the different main mechanics. Then we're going to come back and I'll try to give you my final opinion. Now, the game is for 2 to 5 players, and this is a cooperative dungeon crawling game. Even if you're not necessarily in a dungeon per se, even if you're outdoors, it has that dungeon crawling feel. There's not really a set storyline to the game. Rather, it is incumbent on the players of the game to make their own story, although it is sort of incentivized by different chapter quests and story cards as you go along. The rulebook also has a set of stories that you can actually play through if you want to do a campaign-like setting, but most games in Myth are probably going to be played on the fly just by putting out different dungeon tiles. Now, at the beginning of the game, each player is going to take one of these different player boards, and then they will also choose their hero from one of the 5 that comes with the main game. Now, I'm not sure if these are going to be in the retail version. I'm guessing that they're not going to be. There might just be an additional add-on, but you have like these little character tiles that you're going to slide into your character board here that sort of indicate what type of hero you are. So, in fact, I can't even get this one out. There you go. For instance, you have, let's focus that a bit more. You have the apprentice, and these all have a male and female side, although in the base version of the game you only have either the male or the female. All the extra gender swaps are going to be coming later. So here's the apprentice, and these have little, it's hard to see in the metal here, but you have little indicators of some of your stats. For instance, your vitality, your movements, what your dice pool is when you're resolving attacks, and so on. Here you have the archer, and then you have the brigand, the rogue of the party, the soldier, the acolytes, and those are all the ones that come in the main heroes. Now these are also additional heroes that will be in future releases. So you have the Skald, who's like a bard, the trickster, who's sort of like an artificer, for those familiar with D&D, and the Spriggan. And honestly, I have no idea what a Spriggan is supposed to be, but in any case, those are the different heroes. So you'll choose your hero, whichever one you are, and then you will put your character indicator there. The rest of these spots on the board are reserved for your inventory, so you have different item cards, which are these stacks of cards over here, which will you'll gain during the course of the game by popping different treasure, and you'll actually put them on your board in the appropriate spot. You have weapon, defensive item, armor, helmet, accessory. And along the bottom of the board are where you play your action cards, which you'll play during the course of the game, and every character has their own stack of cards. So and these are actually card sleeves as well, which may or may not come with the retail version of the game also, or be able to buy optionally. But you'll have your own stack of cards. There's the one for the archer. Then you have the brigand card, the acolytes, the apprentice, and the soldier. And when you're playing action cards, you'll put them down here on the bottom of the board. Every action that you play, if it actually requires an action, then you also have to move up this darkness meter as well if it requires action points to actually use the card. For unused action spots that you have at the end of a turn, you actually get to, during the refresh phase, you actually get to move your threat meter back down. The threat meter at the top of the board is just how dangerous you are to the enemies. If the more damage you deal, the higher your threat's going to go. If your threat ever reaches 10 and then a darkness cycle kicks in, that's very bad. A very, very, very bad deleterious effect is going to happen to all of the heroes. But we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go through the rest of some of the components. Now, the game is, of course, a miniatures-based cooperative game, so you have some very cool miniatures. There's the brigand, the soldier, the acolytes, the archer, and the apprentice. And of course, there are monsters. This is absolutely the most impressive one. This is the Terror with 1,000 Legs, which is the big bad boss of the base set. But you also have some captains here who are like these big orcs or trolls. You have little guys, these crawlers, who are like these insectoid type things. And grubbers, who are like goblins, essentially. Everything's named differently, but they're the same fantasy stereotype monsters you are all familiar with. The game also comes with D10s, which are the main type of dice you're going to be rolling for your dice pool, but also these fate dice, and there's 5 fate dice in the game. Now, all of the symbols on these fate dice on their own don't really mean anything, but different card abilities are going to be key to what comes up on these fate dice. So, just an example, let's take a look at one of these monster cards. Now, each of the monsters has their own card as well, just like the heroes. So just getting back to the fate dice, here we go. If this monster were to roll a fate die with this symbol on it, then they get to do their poison attack when they hit a target. All the others, while we're looking at this, some of these other stats, here we have the target defense number. This is what the heroes need to roll at least to hit the crawlers. This is how much vitality they have, only 1. There's their movement. Now, both heroes and monsters have courage points, which are used for different types of tests. They might tell you to test your courage, in which case you have to look at that number. Then you have the different types. Insect, instincts type, and minion. Then here's our dice pool. You see you have 1d10, 1 fate die. This is going to, let's see, Then you have like the damage and such like that. You have the Venom attack, which is one attack on a target. Different stats, whether it's a ranged or melee minion. And then over here, very important, is the priority. So when the darkness cycle begins and the monsters actually get to attack, this is the priority in which they target different heroes. So first it goes off of proximity, then how much threat a hero has. Then if it's the Guile type of hero, because every hero has a different type, like Guile, which is for the Brigand, and so on. Then we have down here, this is whenever these creatures spawn, the 2 crawlers, 2 melee. If it's a heavy spawn, 1 crawler melee, 1 crawler range, 1 stalker, and so on. You've also got muckers, like I said before, these key into all the different minis, and grubs, and the scorpion, which I forgot to show. So the scorpion is right here. And the captains, which are the really bad guys. So, and then of course the big boss, the terror with 1,000 legs, who has 2 cards here. That's just a brief overview of the monsters. Now, there's all types of different tokens that come out on the game according to the different tiles that come out. Now, the tiles, and there's a lot of tiles that come with the game of different shapes and sizes. We have a big one out there on the table, and they're all double-sided. Here's another example of the different tiles, and here we go. Okay, and then there's a lot of smaller ones as well. Now, one thing you're noticing on all of these are these different icons at the bottom. I'll get back to those in a second. I just want to show you some examples of the different types of all of these. And the way this game works is that as you go through the different dungeon or area that you're traversing, you can never backtrack. So you can actually build dungeons that are much bigger than the amount of tiles you actually have in the game, because you're going to take the old tiles and reuse them as you go along. So you'll build the dungeon out, then when you get to a new tile and you need another one, you'll take one of the old ones you can't go back to and flip it back over, and so forth. Now let's talk about these different tiles, or these different icons on each of the tile. When you flip a new tile over, including I believe when you, the very first one, at least that's how I was playing it, you have to account for all these different symbols. This is basically setting up the dungeon automatically for you. Now, the first symbol here, which you see looks like this little diamond symbol, but with a slash, and then it looks like a bear trap. That means you have the option of either taking a quest card or a trap. Now, a trap is going to be various different things based on the roll of a fate die, which is going to negatively impact you on the tile. And there's all kinds of different ones, like fire traps and death traps and things like that. Now, the quest cards are pretty interesting, though, because there's a whole deck of cards over here called the quest cards, which you draw one from the deck, and it will give you it's supposed to thematically represent a quest that you've already done in the past that you're just trying to complete now. It's kind of weird, but it will give you some little backstory there. It will give you special setup that you have to do right away on the tile that you're on, and then it will tell you the different wards that you have. Now, there's all kinds of different ones. You see up in the corner here, there's little letters. A C represents a chapter quest, but you also have story quests, which are much more significant quests, which can actually, that's why they have art on them, which can also give you titles, which are like these little things here, like the Kingslayer. Boy, that sounds familiar. And then you also have act quests as well. And anytime you see a little chain link there, that means that it is the start or continuation of a chain of quests, hence the name. So if you've already completed the first part of Set the Trap, you have to go to the next link in the chain the next time you want to do that quest. So a very interesting thematic story component. That's one of the things that you can choose when you go onto this tile. Next are these Lairs. Lairs are an optional, well, it's not always optional. This is always dependent on the tile you get out. You're going to have to refer to the rulebook a lot, but Lairs will make you put down one of these types of tiles on the board, and there's all kinds of different ones here, but they'll basically go out on the board, and those are basically just like Gauntlet. Those are Lairs where different monsters are going to spawn continuously. And I'm sure this isn't the right type of lair for, every lair is supposed to be different for a monster, but it doesn't really matter. They're all the same size, and they have the same types of stats. So when you spawn one of these, a certain amount of people will come out and will continue to come out every turn depending on the darkness deck. When there's a darkness cycle, it will tell you how many monsters to spawn from that lair. Heroes always start near the edges of the map, depending on how many you have in the game, of course. Oh, I should also mention this miniature here is one of the promo exclusives from the, I think it was exclusive from the campaign. That's supposed to be like a reward, like the Torchbearer, but they're supposed to have a special rule set that has not been released yet, but I have it, so it's there. I just thought I'd show it. So that's what the lair icon will do. Now, the next icon here, this little monster head, is a hunting party. which you have to have, depending on what the number is, there's a little number there as well. That's how many hunting parties you have to have on the board, which are basically just random groups of monsters that you have to account for. The important thing about Myth is that everything is based off of player choice. So a lot of these are just sort of like guidelines of a general thing you have to do, but how many monsters you put out, what type of monster you put out, the type of tile you put down when you move on to a new tile, all of this is based off of player choice. It's very freeform in that regard. The little treasure chest here tells you how many treasure tokens you can possibly gain during this game, and that corresponds here on the darkness track. So this board here tells you that you have to have 5, so you put 5 treasure tokens here, and that is how many treasure you could theoretically find on this tile. Whenever you would pop a treasure, you'll take one from this track and put it on the board in that spot, and hence when all these are gone, you can no longer gain any treasure for this tile. Treasure tokens are spawned mostly through killing monsters or lairs. So if you kill 3 minions in a single pop from an action, a treasure will pop out. If you kill a captain, if you kill a mini boss, if you kill a boss, if you take out a lair, a treasure will pop down. When you gain a treasure, when you actually move onto the spot to grab it, this pouch does not come with the game. It's just one of my pouches, but it'll be full of these little treasure tokens. It starts off with green and silver gray, but you could possibly gain access to blue tokens, which are much better treasure, and whichever one you draw out of there, you're going to take from the corresponding deck of blue, green, or gray, silver, white, or whatever cards, and those represent equipment that you'll get that you can put onto the board. And I already showed you a couple of them, but obviously they get progressively better, but you have a buckler, thieves' tools, fragment of fate. All of these are going to enhance your character, give you more dice to roll, and so on. So that's what that part of the tile does. Continuing on, what else do we have here? We have gold. So when you finish the tile, you're going to get a collection of gold. Now, again, I think this is a Kickstarter a little bit, but otherwise it's cardboard tokens. But you have these little gold pieces, and because this is a cooperative game, all the gold is supposed to be party gold. You decide how you want to spend it as a group. So if you manage to clear out this tile of all the monsters, you'll get that gold. It'll go into your treasure stack. And then finally, the symbol here is a merchant. Remember, it's important that you gain gold before you get a merchant. So these wandering merchants will come around, and they're actually represented by a stack of cards, which you will randomly draw one from. And each of these merchants will be selling something different. This is actually a very neat part of the game. So you will draw one of these cards, figure out what they have for sale, and then if you have that much gold, you're able to buy it, give it to the character that you want, and they all have cool names like Alyssa Dulac and different wares available to purchase from. So that's a cool little part of the game, actually. And there's other symbols too, and a lot of the game is iconography, but that's basically it as far as what happens when a tile comes out. Now, combat, I already talked a little bit about how the monsters react during the darkness cycle, and I told you how you play cards from your hands to fill up your stack here. Now, how that actually works is, so you'll have a hand of 5 cards, and you basically, everything is very free form as far as the turns go. So it starts with a hero cycle, and all the heroes will decide amongst themselves how they want to take their turns. One person can take a couple of actions. The next person can sit it out. But then the next person might say, I'll take a couple actions. Then someone else says, oh, I want to take a couple more actions, and so on. It can be very, very free form. You just keep playing cards until you run out of spaces on your board, or you decide you don't want to play cards anymore. If you play less cards, your threat meter will go down farther during the refresh cycle. But if you play more cards, you get more actions. But remember that as you play cards require you to take actions. So for instance, the sphere of deflection from the mage down here, this little red part of this filled in circle thing here, or diamond thing, it means that it takes 1 action point on the darkness meter. So the enemies are going to be able to react faster. Now over here on the side, these little like moon symbols, these are actually, these indicate movement. And what happens if you do certain types of movement on your turn and how it's going to affect this power. So no movement, partial movement, using all of your movement, hustling, using more movement, might have an impact on how your spell actually reacts and how you use it. And every card is different. Everything has a different ability depending on the hero that you're playing. All the heroes are radically different. So the Brigand has the ability to sneak into shadows and gets bonuses for that. The archer obviously is ranged. It can load her quiver with arrows and more arrow powers and things like that. The soldier almost said barbarian because he actually rages, and that's what his special ability is, and they all have different mechanics associated with them that I really don't have time to get into now. But like I said, the more action points that you use, the faster the darkness track fills up. The more damage you do, the farther your threat track fills up, which means that when you get to the darkness cycle and you have to draw one of the darkness cards, something bad might happen. Now, all of these are the Terror with 1,000 Legs cycle, and when you draw one of the darkness cards during the darkness cycle triggers, when this fills up to 6, you resolve all of these. So an event, so for instance, if no heroes within 2 squares of another, spawn 4 minions and a captain from all active Lairs immediately. Threat penalty, if one of the heroes at least is up to 10 on their threat track, this penalty kicks off. All Lairs have twice the amount of spawn for the rest of the act, which is tremendously, these are always bad things. And then it will tell you which of the creatures on the board activate, which for this set of cards is always everything, essentially. And then you have, after your normal spawn, you have to do an aggressive spawn. So all of these are different. There's actually, I think, maybe 10 cards. All heroes take ×2 damage for the rest of the act as a threat penalty for this one. If there are less than 4 monsters, spawn a captain. So this is basically just the enemy AI and how it reacts. And then all the enemies will get a chance to activate based off of proximity. They will roll their dice and try to attack the heroes. But of course, you're also doing that on your phases and trying to take them out and so on. So the game is very freeform between taking your actions, having the darkness cycle kick in, going back to your actions, refreshing. You can take a card from your hand on the previous turn and take it and save it for later, and then put out more cards, and then therefore have a bigger hand on your next turn, and so on. And whenever you run out of cards, you just reshuffle. There's a lot of stuff I didn't quite cover. I mean, there's tons of little tokens on here and terrain, and there's all kinds of story quests and allies that you can gain, all kinds of different stuff. It's just an overwhelming amount of stuff almost, but that's the general flavor of the game. Everyone takes control of the hero. You go through these randomized dungeon tiles, fighting all these groups of monsters, completing story quests, getting equipment, getting gold, trying to survive. There's even an extra game supplement called Slaughterfield, which is basically just a survive as long as you can mode, where you're just overwhelmed by monsters on all sides trying to survive and try to beat your last score. It's a lot of stuff to take in. Let's go back to my final opinion, and I'll try to make sense of it all. Ultimately, I believe that Myth, the board game, is a wonderful, wonderful game with some incredibly deep flaws. They're not insurmountable flaws, and they may come out over time as the rules are refined and even as I get more and more plays of it in, hopefully. But the fact of the matter is, they shipped a game that probably was not playtested enough or with the right people. Now, I've dabbled in playtesting before, but I've never designed a game. I've never published a game. I don't know exactly what the best way to playtest a game is, but I do know you need to do it a lot. You need blind playtesting, and you should not be playtesting with people who are your friends, your compatriots, your family members. And I'm not accusing Mercs Miniatures of doing that with Myth. They may have, I don't know. But I had the feeling that Myth was a game that was just a fantastic idea, fantastic components, we're going to get to all that was not developed enough. And that's probably why, despite the fact that it's a very big, grandiose, epic game with a lot of pieces, it actually delivered, it was late, but by Kickstarter standards, it was early. That's how fast it came out. But I don't want to get too far ahead. Let's take this from the beginning. Let's start with the components. The components of this game are clearly going to be the one thing that most people do not have any problems with whatsoever, because they're fantastic. The artwork, the design. I mean, I can start with the box itself. The box looks awesome. Spot UV coating. I work in printing, so I know all these terms. Spot UV coating, just awesome artwork. A lot of people probably, well, I don't know. I've never really read anyone complaining too much about the art, but some people probably won't because it looks a little bit cartoony, but I think it's a nice blend of looking sort of animated, but not too silly looking, but also not too far into that dopey, realistic Conan-looking artwork, Frank Frazetta type or Larry Elmore type. I think it's a nice blend of the two, and I like it quite a bit. I like the miniatures. I think that some people have definitely complained about them because they're not like miniatures wargaming quality, like Games Workshop quality, but I don't really care about that. I'm not a heavy miniatures gamer. To me, they look good. To me, it's more than I would have expected for a board game, for sure. And I just think that there's a lot of them in the box. The heroes look great. I think they did a very good job with them. I should also mention here as well that as a Kickstarter backer, and I think I mentioned this during my overview as well, there's a lot more stuff coming to me that's going to be like a second wave or third wave of shipping. There's more factions, more stuff. This is just the base game with a few extra bits and pieces. Also, as I mentioned in my overview, I'm not entirely sure what's going to be exclusive to the Kickstarter backers, what's not going to be exclusive, what will be in the retail box, what you're going to have to pay extra for, like the card sleeves, the little metal tokens for the hero character boards as well. But whether you get them in the retail box or whether you have to buy them extra, those are all awesome. High quality sleeves, love the little metal tokens, love the metal coins, all that stuff is great. So, and when you have it all splayed out on the table, it just looks amazing. The boards have fantastic artwork. I will say this as well. If you want a regular Dungeons and Dragons campaign or any other type of tabletop RPG that requires 1-inch scale battle map or 1-inch squares, this, you may as well take a chance on this game because you can use all of this stuff in that game. Awesome miniatures, awesome looking boards, love all of that stuff. So components, not an issue at all. Well, I will say though, Mercs forgot to pack my rule book in my copy of the game, and a couple of my miniatures were missing. The limbs had fallen off, but I had some super glue laying around from Super Dungeon Explorer times, so that wasn't a problem for me. I'm not really going to knock them for that because these are the sort of growing pains of a Kickstarter, so can't complain about the components. Let's go back to that rulebook though, because I was able to get a PDF of the rulebook online so I could actually play it, and then they did eventually send me an actual copy of the rulebook. The rules, and this is what you're going to read all the controversy about online, the rules are fairly bad. It's not to say that the rulebook itself doesn't look good. The rulebook looks great, and at first glance you're like, wow, okay, everything is categorized neatly, and you have an index of the different component pieces and everything like that, but it's laid out in such an obtuse manner. Trying to find specific things in the rulebook is ridiculously difficult. The first couple of times we played this game, it was constant going back and forth through the rulebook, and I already read the rulebook ahead of time. One of the other people I played with read the rulebook ahead of time. Doesn't really matter. And the reason why it's so difficult is because a lot of these little rules are not in the rulebook. This is sort of the problem with Myth, is that the whole idea of the game, as Mercs is presenting it, is that if there's a conflict in the rules, if there's something you're not clear about, if you don't know what to do next, if you're putting out a tile and you're not sure what to do, it's up to you, the gamer. Now, if you're used to tabletop RPGs, then you're used to making a lot of choices. RPGs are very free-form games. You're constantly choosing what to do. You have a bevy of options available to you. As the Dungeon Master especially, you're constantly creating your world on the fly because you cannot account for everything that the players do. But this is supposed to be a board game. Now I'm opening this box and I'm laying out all these tiles and these miniatures and all these different types of cards, and there's a lot of cards, there's a lot of bits, there's a lot of tokens, and it feels like the game does not have enough structure. Now, if it was just a matter of you having all these different choices, that would be one thing, but how and when you should make these choices are not laid out in any kind of linear way. Is there a rule for whether or not I have to put out all these monsters on the table on this tile as the tile tells me to do, but I also have to draw a quest card and that's telling me to put more monsters out? Do I do both? Do I do some? Do I do all? The rulebook doesn't make it clear. Maybe the fact makes it clear. Not really. Maybe the new version of the fact makes it clear. Or maybe I'm just supposed to make it up on my own and not look it up. That, I think, is what Mercs wants you to do, but I don't like that. I don't think I need to be I'm not a rules lawyer by any stretch of the imagination. I'm the person at a table when people are getting caught up on a rule, I just say, you know what? My game, this is what happens. Let's move on, okay? That's the kind of person I am. But I do want there to be some structure, especially in a cooperative game, where the goal is to be challenged because we're all working together, but you don't want to cheat. You don't want to make the game too easy. And I just feel like the rulebook does a horrible job of telling you what you should be doing at a given time. There's no walkthrough in the main rulebook. You have to download that online, and the walkthrough is not comprehensive because it's just supposed to be the basic rules. So it's very difficult to transition from the basic walkthroughs that they have to actually playing the main campaign, which is what I want to do. I want to go through every storyline scenario, but that is difficult to do on your own, and those walkthroughs that Mercs provided just don't help. So the rulebook and the main rules are what is the biggest problem with this game right now, and they need to be fixed. And just like a day or two before I'm posting this review, they have released more walkthroughs and facts and edited rules, and I haven't gone through all of them yet. I hope that it clears that up, and it's something that should have been taken care of. That is step number one. That is what you must do. You must have clear, concise rules right off the bat. I don't care if you're a Kickstarter game. I don't care if you're a game from a major published company releasing the game on your own. That is your primary goal right there. Don't do anything else before you do that. And I feel that Mercs dropped the ball there. Let's talk about the actual gameplay, though. There are some very neat concepts at work here. My favorite thing about this game, as actual what you do on your turn, is that card-driven gameplay that the heroes take part in. Having your own deck of cards and having them each card represent your different special abilities, which augment either your movement or your attacks, give you special abilities that are all different. They are all different and keyed to each character. If I'm the Brigands, the rat guy, which is super cool, it's my favorite character, I have the Shadows ability. I get to sneak around, I get to stab people like a rogue should do. And I feel very, very different than the other characters and the other players at the table. If I'm the soldier, I have the rage ability, and I'm just like doing what a soldier is supposed to do. I mean, that is my role. And I'm going up there and I'm tanking and I'm ripping through the enemies. If I'm the rogue, the brigand, I'm sneaking around. If I'm the archer, I'm doing ranged attacks. I'm doing it extremely well. Other people can do ranged attacks, but not as well as me if I'm the ranger. But then we have the acolyte, who's an ultimate buffer and support character and doesn't feel like the walking ambulance because you're always doing something different and helpful. And the apprentice is probably the character I had the least experience with, but I've seen other people play him. Super cool. I mean, again, you have your set role and you feel like you're doing it, and that is probably the best thing about this game, is that everyone feels different. You don't just have like one tacked on special ability. Everyone plays differently. You have a different flavor, and you all have to work together. This can be a very difficult cooperative game, which I love. I love brutally hard co-ops. I have Ghost Stories and Robinson Crusoe and Yggdrasil on my shelf for a reason. There's a reason I kept them, and it's because I'm not afraid of a challenge. This game provides it, and you cannot hot dog it in this game. If you need to work together, you need to stick together. You can't go off and try to get your own treasure. The game has built-in safeguards for that. I mean, well, not really, but you're encouraged to pass around treasure and to help each other out and to set each other up for the best combos possible. If you can set someone else up for a run to kill enough monsters to pop another treasure, do it. Getting more treasure helps everybody. The game encourages that, and I love that about it. I love that. I love the unique character roles. Knocks it out of the park there. Now, tied in with that is the idea of playing the different action points, which is also going to make the darkness track go up. That is a very interesting thing, and it's a very difficult concept to wrap your head around. Having your actions directly influence how the darkness track moves up, and therefore what the enemies are actually able to do to you, how tough they are, and also actually determining how the turn order goes, because that's the thing about this game. You have a very loose turn structure. There really isn't a turn structure. You just, the heroes get to go. You take your turns however you want, play your actions. You can take a few actions. Someone else can take a few actions. You can just say, I'm done, or you could just let someone else act and then you act. And the point is that you keep going until that darkness meter fills up, and then you have to deal with the darkness. And that idea is super cool. It's difficult because we're board gamers. We're used to playing with very stringent lockdown rules, clockwise turn order, determining who goes first. This sort of flips that all on its head in a very good way. So I really like that about the game. The darkness itself, it can be this goes back to the rules. Everything is going to go back to the rules. It's difficult to determine. It's very complex how the monsters work. The AI is interesting and it's decent, I think, but it can be very difficult to figure out the first couple of times that you do it. How the monsters are supposed to react. A lot of this, again, at least as far as I can tell, is left up to the players. How you want the monsters to work and react. And it's just kind of funky. It doesn't feel quite right. It's another thing that I think they really need to work on, and how the monsters should move. They stack up against each other. The crawlers are both ranged and melee. Well, how do you determine which ones are ranged and melee? It's just kind of weird. But it's a great concept, the idea of that darkness board and how it works. I mean, I just feel like it wasn't implemented as well as it could have been. The idea of the threat tracker on the heroes is also a great idea. I haven't seen it come up too often in my plays, but that's mostly because it terrified the hell out of us and me when I was doing the solo plays. So I worked very hard to keep that under control. But it's a very interesting concept. The idea that both that and the darkness board has that idea that you can do whatever you want on your turn. You can just keep taking turn after turn after turn, but there will be consequences for that. So I love that it's breaking the traditional dungeon crawling board gaming rules that all of us are so familiar with. So as far as idea and concept and different unique mechanics, Myth sort of knocks it out of the park as far as I'm concerned. It's just so rough around the edges because of the incomplete rules, because you just don't quite know how things are supposed to work. Like the quest cards, you know, those really integrate clunkily with the main rules of the game. And that's also one of my big gripes about the game too, is that it's not very, this is going to sound very strange, but I don't think this game is that thematic. Oh yes, it feels like a dungeon crawl. Yes, it feels like a fantasy game, but I never felt pulled into the world at all. The world just kind of feels very tacked on, and I think that if you were to ask people, especially the staff at Mercs, they would tell you, you're supposed to make your own story. I mean, the quest cards and all that are very generic because this is your story. You determine what you do with it. But this is another matter of, if you're laying out all these particular characters with these particular monsters in this game world, you need to give me something to work with here. I never felt like I was in this world. I don't even know what the name of the world is. You know, if I'm playing the Castle Ravenloft game, I know that that's the Forgotten Realms. Or even Lords of Waterdeep with this Payson on theme, I know that that's Forgotten Realms. I don't know what this world is, and I'm not sure that I care much about these characters, other than they're the characters that we're controlling and trying to win with. So that's kind of a weird thing too, but I like the idea of the quests, and this act quest, and the story quest, the chapter quests, and how they integrate with the rules, but the rules are not that great, and it doesn't really make me feel like I'm part of the world of Myth, I suppose. So I could probably go on and on about this game. I don't want to go on too long, but here's what I'll say. I told you this would be an ambivalent review. Do I think you should buy this game? I think that's what you're here for. You just want to know, is this game worth buying? If you love dungeon crawls, if you're familiar with tabletop RPGs, if you are okay with just being freeform with the rules, and you just want a very strong thematic sort of tabletop game with awesome components, then I think you shouldn't buy it necessarily. No matter what I tell you to do, you need to try this game first. The investment is just too heavy at this point. Even the retail game from Cool Stuff is $63, which is not insignificant. And this is not going to be for everyone. Even if you love dungeon crawling adventure games, this is something that is just different. It is very, very different. I can't even tell you just to buy it for the components, because, you know, there's cheaper components to be had even if you're doing a tabletop RPG. But I am keeping it for now because I'm hoping that there are more rules clarifications. I'm hoping that I can get more and more people in my group to take notice of it, and that it gets smoother as I start to memorize the different rules and different conundrums of the different symbology on the icons, on the tiles. I mean, I didn't even talk about the tiles that much. That whole idea is very, very cool, but just having those icons to go off of and not having any sort of strict guidelines on which tiles you're allowed to put out, just being able to put out whatever tile you want, is just so... The choices in this game can just be overwhelming, and not necessarily in a great way. It should be more streamlined, and because of how clunky everything is right now, I don't think this is a straight out buy for anyone at this point. I think that you need to wait, see if they do a better implementation of the rules. Definitely, if you have a friend, try it with them first. Do not insta-buy this one. I hate to say that because there's so much to love in this game. The unique mechanics and the awesome components and the artwork, all of that is just wonderful, and I love it. But it is just, if I have other dungeon crawl games, I have Super Dungeon Explorer, I've got friends who have Descent, those are just far superior at this point, even if there are some significantly different things in those games. But this one just needs to go back to development, I think. You may need to wait for a second edition of Myth. And I really hope that they take all the wonderful elements of this and just make it better, enhance them, put a better rules framework around them. Because then this could be AAA plus game for sure. That's how much potential is here. So take that however you like. I'm sorry I couldn't be more definitive about it, but this is not a game that is boxed into one definitive review. It's just not. My name is Nick. This has been Board Game Brawl, and I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day and everywhere. Take care.